You ever watch those videos? People talk about how this changed my life and it quietly spoke to you, but then you felt like, well, yeah, but I'm kind of stuck in this one spot. If that's true, then this video is definitely for you. Now, what most people don't realize is these stories, they're not random. They actually follow a particular pattern. And there's different phases that come out. I know this because I've watched dozens of these videos and had this epiphany and started to really kind of compare them, even though the creators are not at all connected. They all kind of speak similarly about their journey. And it's like a mini hero's journey that they all definitely go through. Now, the great thing about knowing this, you can map it out, and it gives you a bit more patience and understanding for the whole process. And the beauty of that is then you can look at it and grow from it rather than thinking, oh, I'm stuck here, I'll never get out or whatever. The other epiphany that I had is it's not about being stuck. It's actually a flywheel. You're going to go through these processes again and again, and you're just going to go deeper and deeper. That's why I found it so beneficial to understand these phases, because then you can recognize it and go through it a lot easier and with a lot more clarity. And the more interesting part of this is, I always thought that, that first phase would be all about motivation, right? You just have to be motivated enough to just do it. But motivation is not the first phase at all.
12 months ago, I finally did a thing that I'd been thinking about for years. I pressed record on my very first YouTube video.
Phase one of the journey is where you're called to create before confidence arrives. It's one I've definitely experienced myself before I started my podcast, the Creative Habits Podcast, and started talking to different creators from around the globe about their creative experience and habits and melding those two together. But it took stepping into the interviews and basically alchemizing the sense of worry, the sense of concern or trepidation into excitement, and actually using that energy to propel the creation process forward. And it's all kinds of voices that have been reflected within many of these creators that said things like, I've been thinking about it for years, or God put it in my heart. It kept coming back to me. It's because these creators don't decide to start. They're actually summoned to creation itself. So this next one is basically a tug on identity, because
I went from being at the top of my game to the bottom of the barrel. I really had to separate my feelings of value and worth from the job titles that I used to have. Instead of thinking of myself as someone that had already arrived, I had to go back to thinking of myself as someone who was striving, who was in the formation period of what I was going to be.
Because as you go through and start creating, your identity starts to get threatened a little bit. Who is this new person you're becoming? And it's like, how can I embrace this new person? Does it threaten who I have been all this time? And it's from there that a lot of growth happens, because you realize how fluid your identity can be. And the creation process becomes more of a craft rather than a set of tasks to be done. And you fall into it. At least that's been my experience, is that it's not so much this idea of these are all the tasks I have to do. You actually start to create as a craft that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And when you fall into that craft, it becomes something that you deepen the well of rather than having to perform with. It brings out that inner creator in you. At least that's been my experience. And that second phase is part of that process.
I kept thinking thoughts like, what if I look awkward, or my voice sounds weird, or even old coworkers or people from school might see my content and it's going to be too embarrassing. They might think I'm weird. What if nobody watches? The list of things that were holding me back went on and on.
This is phase 3, and this one is the most common of all, right? It comes from a lot of different circumstances, sports and otherwise, and that's the fear modality. And really, creators who go through this, every creator does, tend to, as with the other parts, alchemize. So they take their fear and turn it into excitement. Although it's along the same lines as some of the other phases, it still has its own pronounced way of showing up. And for everybody, it's different. But it can affect your voice. It can affect how you show up. And so the interplay of fear and performance versus presence is one to explore on an ongoing basis. It's not a phase, I think, at least from my own experience, that just comes and then goes. It's actually an ongoing practice, and where you kind of move into it. Your courage comes from creating. And the more that you step forward and do that, the less it feels like fear, and the more it feels like excitement. All right, phase 4. That's a 0 stage phase.
As an introvert, putting myself out there felt like a huge leap, but I hit publish and nothing happened. Views trickled in, no likes, no comments. It was honestly a bit of an anticlimax. But I kept going.
It's one of those where you expect certain things to happen, like for you to get some views and you get none, or you get many less than what you expect, or maybe you get 100 views on a good day. And this phase actually humbles everyone. And it's not just a phase that comes and goes. It's not like you have a viral hit and then from there on out, everything's fine. Although there are a lot of creators that portray it that way. At least from my own experience, what comes back again and again is you'll go through waves and cycles, and you'll have a hit and it brings everything up, but then things can change all the time. The algorithm's changing all the time. Audiences change all the time. You have things going on in the outside world that changes the dynamics of everything. So it's one of those humbling phases that as a creator, it brings you back to being a beginner. And I think as a tool, that's golden, because you do want to have that beginner mindset. Even as you move along and you get used to things, it's always good to remain humble and have that beginner's perspective, even as you get better and better and deeper into creating. The truth is, the algorithm doesn't test talent, it tests commitment. Okay, this next one is called the internal shift.
Talking more about that inner confidence that comes from actually keeping a promise to yourself. It's that confidence that comes from saying, I'm going to show up and I'm going to stick to something, and then actually following through with it and actually keeping that promise, even if you are overthinking everything. Because I think most of us go through life breaking tiny promises to ourselves. We tell ourselves we're going to spend less time on our phone, and then we don't. We say we're going to exercise more, and then we don't. And when you actually break through that pattern and actually keep a promise to yourself, it does give you a sense of confidence that is very hard to fake.
This is inevitable after the 0 phase, because it's like, okay, I can finally start to create from a space that doesn't look at metrics as much. And it's like I stopped caring. I fell in love with the process. I wasn't chasing money anymore. And growth happens internally at that point. And you start to realize that the whole game of YouTube isn't about the views and all that. And you internalize the process, and that strength, I think, anyway, from my own experience, actually gives you greater resonance and greater ability to actually be on camera or with a video without caring. I mean, you care, but you don't care. And it's that dynamic that allows you to be more magnetic, so to speak, or at least be more in resonance with the audience you want. And you care about that audience and not the wider, like, viral hit. Okay, this is phase number 6, and this is fun. This part is totally awesome because it's basically skill accumulation.
Everything that I did and the success of what I did, it all stemmed back to my ideas and to my ability to bring those ideas to life.
You start to realize you're not building a YouTube channel. You're not building a channel. You're building a creator brain. And there's much more dynamic that comes from that. And you start to appreciate the skills that you developed along the way. You can look back at previous videos and cringe, and then look at how far you've come. And this is really when it starts to kick in, that the whole creator journey is ongoing. It's deepening and deepening and deepening. And even as you appreciate the skills that you developed, you can also see the depth of skills that you still need to acquire. And that appreciation just makes it so much fun, because you finally get that it is a journey and that it's not about the viral views and all that. There's this whole other aspect to being a creator that deepens life itself for you and gets you on a totally different path than you might have been before. And that skill acquisition, that's very, very satisfying. All right, this next phase is fun as well, because it's basically a community signal, right?
The thing that really means the world to me is when somebody reaches out, or when someone leaves a comment saying that my videos genuinely helped them or genuinely got them results with their own YouTube channel. Like, that means so much more than just, hitting a certain amount of subscribers.
Right, and this comes externally as you start to engage with an audience and they start to resonate with you. And when that happens, there are signals that they give, and it kind of shows that you're on the right track. And the metrics start to matter less than these markers with community. People start to feel seen. They start to resonate with the thing beyond the bots, of course, and you have to ignore all the negative backlash and whatever else comes up. But when you get a true human being that says, you know what, you really actually hit a note of the stuff that I'm experiencing, and you really gave me a new perspective on all of it. And that kind of metric goes a long way. That's where your small audience really is golden, you know, and the size is really where you're like, well, I'm going to miss that. You get to a certain size and you aren't going to necessarily be able to read all those comments and do all those things. So it's such a beautiful stage, and one to commemorate, you know, to engage with and appreciate. And really, again, this is where it really starts to kick in. This phase doesn't happen, I think, for everyone at the same point, you know, and all these phases, you know, it kind of like, it really does vary when one happens or another happens, but they are all there kind of in a line, you know. Everybody's got their squiggly journey, so it's not like necessarily like it's going to be one direct path, this phase and that phase, but they all appear and all mingle together. Phase number 8 is really, you know, bringing all things together and saying, okay, now that you've had all these changes, you've had all these experiences, you start to see the identity of who you are after that. And
my goal is essentially to have a lab of human reinvention where I can combine psychology-informed practices, neuroscience research, and motivational interviewing or coaching tactics to really help build people up depending on where they're starting in terms of their comfort levels, their safety, their community, and start slowly and gradually building toward what their strengths are, what they want out of life, and instilling them with the understanding that they can get
and
there.
It really becomes clear, not only in your videos, but also just in a sense of, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And you no longer become apologetic about it at all. In fact, you're proud of your journey. And even those that don't understand, you're okay that they don't. Whereas before, you kind of cringe behind the idea of being a content creator or creating on videos on YouTube. Now, it's a sense of empowerment where you're okay with that. You unapologetically move forward with the idea, and it becomes part of who you are without having to cringe, without having to apologize. And really, you start to acknowledge that you are part of that whole dynamic. And it's beautiful because there's so much that you wouldn't get until you actually went through the process and got to this specific stage. Which brings us to the last stage, which is stage number 9. Now, stage 9 is cool because it's the last part of the phase, and it really is an accumulation of everything. And it's really where you get that self-confidence in the whole process, the discipline and the commitment to follow through, and you can actually see the results. Even if they aren't money-oriented, you can see where they could be down the line.
And the way I would get there would be to start each week with one simple question. Who can I help, and what problem can I solve? It is all too easy to overcomplicate things, to try and do too much, and to be terrible at all of it. Accepting that you can only do so much and simplifying your approach is the real key to consistency, and consistency is how you win on YouTube. And it was this approach that got me back into the right headspace.
I believe your authority comes from that inner resonance and that ability to create and to keep on creating from your voice and with what matters, connecting with your audience. And you can see where freedom comes from this. It's an ongoing dynamic, which brings us to surprise doctrines, so to speak, that come from this whole process. And that comes in the next video. So if you found this video helpful, be sure to share it with somebody who you think will find it helpful as well. Give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss those doctrines that have basically become cornerstones of your further creative journey. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.